The microphone headset clipped to Sarah Jenkins' belt dug into her hip, a familiar, grounding pressure that anchored her to the present moment, even as her mind drifted back to 1875. The late afternoon sun hung low and heavy over Hollow Creek, casting long, dramatic shadows across the cobblestones of Founders Square, turning the dust motes dancing in the air into suspended flecks of gold. It was the magic hour, that precise window of time photographers coveted, and for the 30 tourists gathered in a semicircle before her, it was the perfect lighting to view the town's idol. Sarah adjusted her voice, pitching it to carry over the low hum of traffic and the distant, rhythmic hammering of construction crews preparing the grandstands. She knew the script by heart. She had written most of it herself, but today, with the humidity clinging to her skin like a second shirt and the pressure of the upcoming Jubilee pressing on her temples, the words felt heavier than usual. She took a breath, letting the practiced enthusiasm wash over her features, a mask sliding into place. "If you look up," Sarah commanded, sweeping her arm upward in a theatrical arc that drew every eye to the bronze behemoth looming above them. "You aren't just looking at a statue. You are looking at the reason we are all standing here today. Colonel Jameson Blackwood." The statue was magnificent, a testament to the town's wealth and pride. It depicted the colonel mid-stride, a Winchester rifle cradled in one arm, his other hand outstretched as if offering salvation to the valley. The oxidation of the bronze had turned the folds of his coat a dignified verdigris, but his face, polished by the elements and annual cleanings, gleamed with an eternal, stoic resolve. Sarah watched the tourists' faces. There was the father in the plaid shirt, nodding solemnly as he adjusted his camera lens. The young couple holding hands, looking up with wide-eyed reverence, and the inevitable bored teenager in the back, kicking at a loose stone. She had to reach them all. She had to make them feel the fear of that winter in 1875. Picture this valley without the coffee shops, without the paved roads, without the safety we take for granted. Sarah continued, stepping closer to the group, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hush that forced them to lean in. "It is December, 1875. The air is so cold it freezes the breath in your lungs. The settlers here were starving, terrified, huddled in makeshift cabins. They had struck gold in the creek, yes, but gold without protection is just a death sentence. And death was coming for them." She paused for effect, locking eyes with the bored teenager until he stopped kicking the stone. The Red Bandana Gang, ruthless outlaws who had burned 3 settlements to the ground, were riding down the ridge. They didn't want to share the gold. They wanted to erase this town from the map. Behind the crowd, a banner snapped in the wind. 150 years of glory, the Blackwood Jubilee. The town was dressing itself up for the party of the century. Fresh bunting in red, white, and blue draped every storefront. The smell of frying dough and sugar from the Blackwood burger stand wafted through the square, mixing with the scent of pine and asphalt. It was a sensory overload, a commercialized celebration of heritage, and Sarah was the high priestess of this liturgy. "Colonel Blackwood didn't have to stay," Sarah said, her voice rising now, building the crescendo. "He was a passing traveler, a military man with his own wars to fight. But when he saw the smoke on the horizon, when he heard the cries of the families here, he didn't ride away. He dug in. He rallied the men, he comforted the women, and he devised the strategy that would save them all. For 3 days they held the line at the creek bed, outnumbered, outgunned, but not outmatched in spirit." She gestured to the inscription at the base of the pedestal, "Valor above self." Because of him, the bandits were driven off. Because of him, the mine remained in the hands of the people. And because of him, Hollow Creek grew from a muddy camp into the jewel of Oregon you see today. Applause rippled through the group, polite but genuine. The father in the plaid shirt wiped his forehead and smiled. "That's a hell of a story," he muttered to his wife. Sarah smiled back, a genuine warmth reaching her eyes this time. She loved this part. She loved the connection, the way history, or at least the accepted version of it, could bridge the gap between strangers. She dismissed the group, directing them toward the gift shop where they could buy miniature replicas of the Colonel and Gold Rush taffy, and watched them disperse like leaves caught in a stream. As the crowd thinned, The smile faded from Sarah's face, replaced by a weary grimace. She massaged the back of her neck. The heat was oppressive, but it wasn't just the weather. It was the town itself. Hollow Creek felt like a pot about to boil over. The Jubilee was 2 weeks away, and the expectations were suffocating. Mayor Miller had leveraged the entire municipal budget on this event, banking on the influx of tourism to save the town's failing infrastructure. The roads were crumbling, the water pipes were ancient, but all the money was going into fireworks, parades, and repainting the facade of a history that felt more like a brand than a reality. Sarah gathered her notes and began the walk back to the cultural center, her boots clicking rhythmically on the sidewalk. She passed the old theater, now covered in scaffolding, and the boutique hotel that had once been the assay office. Everywhere she looked, the colonel's face stared back. On posters, on flags, even stenciled onto the windows of the bakery. It was comforting in a way, this ubiquity. It offered a sense of order. Good guys and bad guys, heroes and villains. It was a simple narrative for a complicated world, and Sarah had built her career on maintaining that simplicity. She was the keeper of the myth, and she took the job seriously. "Sarah, just the person I need to see." The voice boomed from the doorway of City Hall. Mayor Miller stood there, a man who seemed constructed entirely of expensive suits and nervous energy. He was sweating profusely, dabbing at his receding hairline with a silk handkerchief. "Mr. Mayor," Sarah nodded, slowing her pace but not stopping. The tour went well. 30 heads, most of them headed to the gift shop. Miller scurried down the steps to fall in step beside her. Good. That's what we need. Revenue, Sarah. Volume. But listen, I have a hiccup. A logistical nightmare, really." He lowered his voice, glancing around as if spies were lurking behind the flower planters. "The Historical Society is breathing down my neck about the artifacts display for the VIP dinner. They say the main exhibit hall feels sparse. They want more personal items of the colonel. Letters, maps, anything that smells like 1875. Sarah sighed. "We've displayed everything we have, Miller. The rifle, the coat, the saddle. The archives are empty." "Are they?" Miller stopped, blocking her path. His eyes were desperate. "What about the library basement? The sublevel?" The construction crew down there said they found a few sealed-off sections behind the old coal chute while they were retrofitting the HVAC. "They can't touch it without a heritage officer present." "That's you." Sarah frowned. The library was the oldest building in town, a Gothic revival structure that sat on the edge of the creek like a brooding gargoyle. The sub-basement was notorious, prone to flooding, filled with mold, and abandoned since the 1950s. "That place is a hazard, Miller. It's not an archive. It's a tomb for water-damaged tax records." "Just look," Miller pleaded, gripping her arm lightly before pulling back. "Just go down there, poke around for an hour. If you find a spur, a button, a piece of paper with a date on it, bring it up. We need texture, Sarah. We need to sell the legend. Selling the legend. That's all it ever was." Sarah nodded, mostly to get him to stop talking. "Fine. I'll go over there before I clock out. But don't expect miracles. It's mostly just rat nests down there. You're a savior, Sarah. A true patriot of Hollow Creek." Miller beamed, already turning back toward his air-conditioned office. Sarah watched him go, a sour taste in her mouth. She checked her watch. 5:15 p.m. The sun was dipping below the tree line, turning the golden light into a bruised purple. She turned her collar up against a sudden, inexplicable chill and headed toward the library. The library was silent when she arrived, the construction crew having packed up for the day. The interior smelled of sawdust and old paper, a dry, dusty scent that Sarah usually found comforting. But today, underneath the dryness, there was the dank, metallic tang of the river. She navigated the maze of plastic tarps and stacked chairs in the lobby, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom of the unlit hallway. The elevator was out of order, taped off with yellow caution bands, so she took the stairs. Down, past the main stacks, down, past the reference section, down, into the employee-only storage, and then, deeper still, The door to the sub-basement was a heavy iron slab, rusted at the hinges. It groaned in protest as Sarah heaved it open, the sound echoing like a dying animal in the dark. The air that rushed out to meet her was cold and thick, heavy with the weight of earth and neglect. She flicked the switch on the wall, but the overhead bulbs merely flickered and died. "Perfect," she muttered, relying on the narrow cone of light from her heavy-duty flashlight. The sub-basement was a cavern of shadows. Concrete pillars, stained with watermarks from floods decades past, rose up into the darkness like the trunks of petrified trees. Piles of discarded furniture, broken shelving units, and boxes of microfiche lay scattered in chaotic heaps. The silence here was absolute, pressing against her ears. The only sound was the squelch of her boots on the damp floor and the rapid thudding of her own heart. She wasn't easily spooked. She spent her life in old buildings. But there was something about this depth that felt wrong. It felt forgotten on purpose. She located the area the mayor had mentioned, the old coal chute near the north wall. The construction crew had been aggressive. They had sledgehammered through a section of drywall to run new ventilation ducts, exposing the original brick foundation of the building. But they had stopped halfway. Sarah moved closer, stepping over chunks of plaster and debris. The beam of her light played across the jagged hole in the wall. The workers had broken through a false partition. Behind the drywall wasn't the foundation. It was a void, a crawlspace. Curiosity warred with common sense. Common sense told her to call it a night, report that there was nothing but rot, and go home to a glass of wine. But the historian in her, the part of her that genuinely loved the puzzle of the past, wouldn't let her turn away. She crouched down, shining the light into the hole. The space beyond was small, barely 4 feet wide, trapped between the false wall and the true stone foundation. It was dry, surprisingly, protected from the dampness of the main room. And there, sitting on a wooden pallet that had long since turned to dust, was a box. It wasn't a cardboard box or a crate. It was a steamer trunk, small but sturdy, bound in iron bands and heavy leather that had cracked and peeled like sunburned skin. Sarah's breath hitched. This wasn't debris. This was placed here, hidden here. She reached through the hole, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the lock. It was heavy. She grabbed the handle and pulled. The trunk scraped against the stone floor, a harsh, grating sound that made her wince. She dragged it out into the main room, the effort straining her shoulders. Under the erratic light of her flashlight, she examined it. There were no markings, no name, just a sturdy, travel-worn lock. She looked around for a tool, spotting a discarded crowbar left by the construction crew near a pile of debris. "Forgive me," she whispered to the empty room, wedging the tip of the crowbar under the latch. With a sharp crack, the rusted mechanism gave way. The lid groaned open. Sarah expected clothes. Moth-eaten wool, maybe an old uniform, or perhaps nothing at all. Instead, the trunk was filled with books, ledgers, thick, heavy accounting books with leather spines. And nestled on top of them, a smaller book, bound in red fabric that had faded to a dusty pink. It looked like a diary. Sarah sat back on her heels, the cold dampness of the floor seeping through her jeans. She picked up the small red book. Her hands were trembling, though she couldn't say why. It was just paper, just history. She opened the cover. The handwriting was elegant, slanted, and frantic. The ink had browned with age, but the date at the top of the first page was clear, stark against the yellowed paper. December 24th, 1874. Sarah frowned. The date was wrong. The history books, the books she quoted every single day, said the settlement was established in 1875. Blackwood arrived in late 75. Before that, there was nothing here but wilderness and the creek. She began to read the first entry. The snow is falling harder now. It covers the graves of the children we lost on the trail. But we are here. We have found the vein in the water. My husband, Thomas, calls it the provider. We will build our home here, in this hollow by the creek. We are the first. May God grant us the strength to keep it. Sarah blinked, rereading the line. We are the first. She turned the page, skipping months ahead. June, 1875. Strangers arrived today. Men with cold eyes and guns on their hips. They do not look like miners. Their leader is a man of charm and menace. He calls himself Colonel Blackwood. He watched Thomas work the sluice box all afternoon without saying a word. I do not like the way he looks at our claim. I do not like the way he looks at our sons. The air in the basement seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't just a discrepancy. This was a contradiction of the foundational truth of Hollow Creek. Blackwood didn't save the miners from bandits. Blackwood found miners who were already there. She flipped toward the end of the diary. The handwriting deteriorated, becoming jagged and rushed, blotched with spots that looked disturbingly like dried iron. December 20th, 1875. They are cutting off the roads. Blackwood says it is for our protection against the bandits. But there are no bandits. There is only him. He demands the deed to the claim. Thomas refused. Tonight, I saw them sharpening their sabers by the fire. They are not guarding us. They are corralling us. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. She looked at the ledgers in the trunk. She opened the top one. It wasn't a military log. It was a tax record, meticulously detailed, listing the transfer of Vance property to Blackwood Estate for the sum of $0, dated December 26, 1875. 2 days after the massacre she knew as the Battle of Hollow Creek. The silence of the library pressed in on her, no longer empty, but filled with the weight of 100 screaming ghosts. The statue in the square, the face she had just praised to 30 people, the hero on the banners. It was all a lie, a golden, blood-soaked lie. She stared at the last page of the diary. The entry was unfinished. The pen dragged across the paper as if the writer had been pulled away. History is not what happened, Alara Vance had written. It is what the murderers tell the children so they can sleep at night. If anyone finds this, know that we were here. We were happy, and he took it all. A loud clank from the pipes overhead made Sarah jump, dropping the book. The echo slammed around the room. She scrambled to pick it up, clutching it to her chest like a shield. She was alone in the dark, buried under tons of concrete and a century of deception. She needed to get out. She needed air. But as she stood up, clutching the diary and one of the damning ledgers, she realized with a terrifying clarity. Getting out was the easy part. The hard part would be living in a world where the ground beneath her feet was built on bones. Sarah switched off her flashlight, plunging the room into darkness for a split second before the faint light from the hallway filtered in. In that moment of blackness, she felt the gaze of the past on her. It wasn't a gentle gaze. It was a demand. She stepped toward the door, leaving the empty trunk open like a screaming mouth, and began the long ascent back to the surface. The heavy iron door of the library clicked shut behind Sarah, sealing the damp, moldering silence of the sub-basement back into the earth. But the chill of the tomb clung to her skin like a film of oil. She emerged into the main lobby, where the air was stagnant and smelled faintly of floor wax, a mundane scent that now felt jarringly artificial. Outside, the sun had fully set, plunging Hollow Creek into a twilight that was usually Sarah's favorite time of day, the magic hour, when the street lamps hummed to life and the brick facades of Main Street glowed with a nostalgic warmth. But as she pushed through the double-glass doors and stepped onto the sidewalk, the world had shifted on its axis. The nostalgia was gone, replaced by a sinister distortion. The twinkling fairy lights strung between the oak trees for the upcoming Jubilee didn't look festive anymore. They looked like a cage. The bunting draped over the balconies wasn't patriotic red, white, and blue. It was a cheap costume thrown over a corpse to hide the decay. Sarah clutched her canvas tote bag against her ribs, feeling the hard, rectangular outline of the ledgers and the diary pressing against her side. Felt less like a discovery and more like a stolen weapon. She walked quickly toward her car, her boots echoing too loudly on the pavement. Every sound made her flinch. A car backfiring, a burst of laughter from the tavern across the street, the distant wail of a siren. Paranoia, cold and prickly, began to crawl up the back of her neck. She felt watched, It was irrational. Mayor Miller was likely halfway through his second martini at the country club by now, congratulating himself on his logistical genius. But the feeling persisted. The eyes of the town felt fixed on her. She reached her car, a sensible silver sedan parked beneath the looming shadow of the Blackwood statue. For 5 years, she had parked here every day. For 5 years, she had looked up at that bronze face and felt a sense of security. Now, standing with her key fob in hand, she couldn't bring herself to look him in the eye. She glanced up at the pedestal, at the inscription "Valor above self," and felt a surge of nausea so violent she had to lean against the car door to steady herself. Above her, the bronze colonel stared eternally toward the horizon, his rifle cocked, freezing the moment of his greatest lie in metal. He wasn't guarding the town. He was holding it hostage. Sarah got into the car and locked the doors, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the ignition. She didn't drive home immediately. She couldn't go back to her apartment, not yet. Her apartment was filled with framed maps of the territory, replica artifacts, and shelves of books extolling the virtues of the pioneers. It was a shrine to the lie she had just uncovered. Instead, she drove aimlessly, letting the car take her to the edge of town, past the manicured lawns of the historic district and out toward the reservoir. She needed silence. She needed to purge the voice of the tour guide from her head. She parked on a gravel overlook, the engine ticking as it cooled. Under the dome light of the car, she opened the bag. The smell of the basement filled the small cabin. Earth, rot, and old paper. She pulled out the red diary first. Alara Vance. The name meant nothing to the history books, yet it screamed from the pages. Sarah turned on her phone's flashlight, the harsh LED beam illuminating the delicate, fading script. She read again, searching for a loophole, a mistake, anything that would allow her to go back to being the Sarah Jenkins who loved this town. Maybe Alara was crazy. Maybe this was a work of fiction. But then she opened the ledger. It was a tax record from the county assessor's office, dating back to 1876. It was dry, bureaucratic, and undeniable. It listed the transfer of 18 parcels of land, the exact footprint of modern-day Hollow Creek, from Vance T. and Vance E. to Blackwood Mining Consortium. The transaction type was listed as forfeiture due to abandonment. Abandonment, 2 days after Christmas. 2 days after Alara wrote that they were being corralled. You don't abandon a gold mine. You don't walk away from the provider. You die, and someone steps over your body to sign the deed. Sarah slammed the ledger shut. The cognitive dissonance was splitting her headache open. She wasn't just a historian. She was an accomplice. Every tour she gave, every ticket she sold, every enthusiastic speech about the founding fathers was a brick in the wall that hid the massacre. She thought about the mayor's desperation for the Jubilee, his talk of selling the legend. He knew. Maybe not the details, maybe he had never seen this specific diary, but the power structures of this town knew. They had to. You don't bury a trunk inside a false wall by accident. Okay, Sarah, she whispered to the empty car. Think. You have a diary. You have a ledger. But paper can be dismissed. Paper can be called a forgery. Miller will crush you if you bring him this. He'll say you faked it to sabotage the festival. She needed more. She needed a pulse. She needed a living tether to 1875. She picked up the diary again, flipping to the very end. The last few pages were frantic, written in pencil when the ink had run dry. I have sent little Martha away with the Miller family wagon. They are good people moving north to Portland. She is only 4. She will not remember the blood. She will not remember her name. I told them to call her Stone so she would be hard, so she would not break like we did. If she lives, the blood of the creek lives. Martha Stone. Sarah grabbed her phone. Her thumbs flew across the screen, accessing the digital archives of the State Census Bureau, a subscription she paid for out of her own pocket for genealogy research. She typed in Martha Stone, born circa 1871. The search will spun. Sarah held her breath. 0 results in Hollow Creek. 0 results in the county. She expanded the search. Oregon 1880 census. A hit. Martha Stone, age 9. Residing in Portland. Household of Jeremiah Miller. Sarah traced the line. It was tedious digital detective work, the kind she usually found relaxing, but tonight it felt like defusing a bomb. Martha Stone married a man named Higgins in 1895. Martha Higgins had a daughter, Sarah, a coincidence that made Sarah shiver. In 1900, Sarah Higgins married a chaotic string of husbands, eventually settling on the surname Little. Sarah Little had a daughter in 1933, Martha Little. Sarah did the math. Born in 1933, that would make her 92 years old. She searched for Martha Little in the current state database. Most people that age had passed, or their digital footprints had faded into the obscurity of nursing homes and paper files. But then, a recent address update popped up from 2 years ago. A Medicaid filing. Current residence. Shady Pines Assisted Living Facility. Address, 4402 Route 9, Cedar Hollow. Cedar Hollow. It wasn't Portland. It was here. Or rather, it was near here. Cedar Hollow was the unincorporated scrap of land 20 miles west of Hollow Creek, a place where the tourists never went. It was a place of trailer parks, rusted farming equipment, and silence. The descendants of the victims hadn't just been killed. The survivors had been pushed to the margins, forced to live in the shadow of the town that stole their birthright. Sarah started the car. It was nearly 9 o'clock at night. Visiting hours were over. She didn't care. The drive to Cedar Hollow was a journey through time, but in reverse. She left the LED-lit, smooth-paved streets of Hollow Creek, passing the gated communities and the artisanal coffee roasters. As she crossed the county line, the road narrowed. The asphalt turned gray and cracked, potholed and neglected. The streetlights vanished, replaced by the oppressive darkness of the pine forest. The deeper she drove, the more the wealth stripped away. The houses became smaller, the yards cluttered with the debris of survival. This was the reality of the region without the Blackwood gold. This was what Hollow Creek would have been without the theft. Shady Pines appeared out of the darkness like a bad dream. It was a single-story concrete block building, stained with rain streaks and surrounded by a chain-link fence. A flickering fluorescent sign buzzed near the entrance. The parking lot was empty save for a few rusted employee cars. Sarah parked her sedan, which looked obscenely new in this setting, and grabbed the tote bag. The sliding glass doors ground open with a gritty protest. The lobby smelled of bleach, boiled vegetables, and something underlying it all. The stale, sweet scent of old age and waiting. The receptionist, a young woman with purple-streaked hair and tired eyes, didn't even look up from her phone. Visiting hours ended at 8, she droned. I'm a relative, Sarah lied effortlessly. I just drove in from California. My flight was delayed. It's my grandmother's birthday. Please, I just want to say goodnight. The receptionist looked up, scanning Sarah's face. Maybe she saw the desperation there and mistook it for familial love. Maybe she just didn't get paid enough to argue. She sighed and buzzed the inner door. Room 304. Down the hall, take a left. If she's asleep, don't wake the whole wing. Sarah walked down the corridor. The linoleum was scuffed. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. Doors were open on either side, revealing glimpses of lives condensed into single rooms. A television flickering blue light onto a sleeping face, a wheelchair folded in a corner, a bedside table cluttered with pill bottles. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. Room 304 was at the very end of the hall. The door was ajar. Sarah knocked softly. Mrs. Little? There was no answer. Sarah pushed the door open. The room was small, lit only by the street lamp outside the window. In the corner, sitting in a high-backed armchair that swallowed her frail frame, was a woman. She was tiny, her body whittled down by time to mere bone and parchment skin. Her hair was a wispy cloud of white, and her hands, resting on a crocheted blanket, looked like gnarled roots. She was staring out the window at the darkness. Mrs. Little? Sarah stepped inside. Martha? The woman didn't turn. Nurse? Her voice was like dry leaves skittering on pavement. I told you I don't want the pills tonight. They make my dreams loud. I'm not the nurse, Sarah said, her voice trembling. She pulled the visitor's chair closer. My name is Sarah. I'm from Hollow Creek. At the mention of the town, Martha's head snapped around. Her eyes were milky with cataracts, blind or nearly so, but she stared with an intensity that pinned Sarah to the chair. Hollow Creek. She spat the name. Nobody from that place comes here. Did the tax man send you? I have nothing left to take. No, Sarah said quickly. She reached into her bag. Her hands felt clumsy. I came because I found something. In the library basement. Hidden in a wall. Martha went still. The air in the room seemed to tighten. A wall? A trunk, Sarah whispered. Full of ledgers. And a diary. A red diary. A sound escaped Martha's throat. A gasp or a sob, cut short. Her hands gripped the blanket so hard her knuckles turned white. Red, she murmured. She always loved red. Said it was the only color the dust couldn't hide. Sarah opened the book to a marked page. The writer, her name was Alara Vance. Don't, Martha hissed, shrinking back into her chair. Don't say that name. It's cursed. They said if we spoke it, the colonel would come back. The colonel is dead, Martha, Sarah said, leaning forward. He's been dead for 100 years. He's just a statue now. A lie made of metal. He's not dead, Martha whispered, her voice trembling with a child's fear trapped in an old woman's body. He's in the money. He's in the ground. He's everywhere. My mother, she told me, she was the little one. The one who hid in the wagon. Martha Stone, Sarah said gently. Martha began to weep. It wasn't a loud cry. It was a silent, shaking disintegration. Tears tracked through the deep crevices of her face. She never forgot. She made me memorize it. Every Christmas Eve, she would lock the doors and turn off the lights and tell me the story. How the snow turned pink. How the men laughed while they burned the tents. Sarah felt her own tears hot on her cheeks. This was it. The living connection. The history books were sterile, but this was the raw, open wound of the past. Why didn't anyone speak up? Sarah asked, her voice cracking. Why didn't you tell someone? Martha let out a bitter, wheezing laugh. She turned her blind face toward Sarah. Tell who? The sheriff? The judge? Who do you think sat on the board of the Blackwood Company? Who do you think built the schools? They own the ink, girl. They write the words. My mother tried once in 1920. She went to the newspaper. 2 days later, our barn burned down. They told us next time it would be the house with us inside. Martha reached out, her hand groping blindly until her cold, dry fingers found Sarah's wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Why are you here? Martha demanded. You're one of them. You smell like them. You smell like expensive soap and ignorance. I was one of them, Sarah admitted, the shame burning in her chest. I'm the guide. I tell the stories. I've told the lie 1,000 times. But I can't do it anymore. She placed the diary in Martha's hands. The old woman's fingers traced the texture of the worn fabric, reading the object through touch in a way her eyes no longer could. I want to fix it, Sarah said. The Jubilee is in 2 weeks. Everyone will be there. The cameras. The news. I want to tell the truth. But I can't do it alone. They'll call me a liar. They'll say I forged the book. Martha ran her thumb over the spine of the diary. She was silent for a long time. Outside, a heavy truck rumbled past on the highway, shaking the thin glass of the window. You want to destroy the festival, Martha said softly. It wasn't a question. I want to destroy the lie, Sarah corrected. Martha nodded slowly. A shift occurred in her face. The fear that had been there a moment ago began to recede, replaced by something harder, something ancient. It was the look of the woman who wrote the diary, a look of defiance that had survived a century of silence. I have something too, Martha said. Open the top drawer of the dresser. Under the socks. Sarah obeyed. She pulled open the cheap laminate drawer. Beneath a pile of gray wool socks lay a small, tin box, the kind used for breath mints. She brought it to Martha. Martha opened the tin with a thumbnail. Inside lay a single, heavy object wrapped in cotton. She unwrapped it. It was a locket. Gold. Crude. Hand-hammered gold. Shaped like a rough nugget. It was unrefined, raw, the kind of gold that came straight from a riverbed. "My grandmother wore this," Martha said. "It was the first nugget Thomas found. She hid it in her dress when they ran. It's not stamped with the Blackwood seal. It's raw. And on the back." Sarah took the locket and turned it over. Scratched into the soft metal with a knife point were initials. T and E Vance, 1874. "Proof," Sarah breathed. "Physical proof that they were there a year before Blackwood claimed discovery." "The town says we are trash," Martha said, her voice gaining strength, the tremble vanishing. "They say we are drifters who tried to steal their hero's gold. But we were the gold. We were the claim." She closed her hand over Sarah's, pressing the locket into her palm. "You take this. You take the book. You burn their party to the ground." "I will," Sarah promised. "But I need you. I need your voice. People can ignore a book. They can't ignore you." Martha hesitated. She looked at her frail body, the wheelchair, the prison of the nursing home. Then, a small, fierce smile touched her lips. "I haven't been to Hollow Creek since I was a girl. My mother forbade it. She said the ground was poisoned." She paused, tilting her head as if listening to a distant sound. "I think it's time I went back to church." Sarah felt a shiver of electricity. This wasn't just research anymore. This was a conspiracy. "I'll come back for you," Sarah said. "On the day of the Jubilee. I'll get you in. I don't know how yet, but I will." "Be careful, girl," Martha warned, her grip tightening again. "The mayor isn't the problem. The mayor is just a puppet. The problem is the people. They love their fairy tale. If you try to wake them up, they won't thank you. They'll hate you for it." "Let them hate me," Sarah said, standing up. She put the locket in her pocket right next to the diary. She felt heavier now, weighted down by the truth, but for the first time in years, she felt entirely steady. "I'm done with fairy tales." Sarah left the room, the sound of Martha's breathing following her out. She walked back through the sterile hallway, past the receptionist who was now dozing, and out into the night air. The darkness of Cedar Hollow didn't feel oppressive anymore. Felt like cover. She got into her car and tossed the bag onto the passenger seat. She started the engine but didn't put it in gear. She looked at her phone. 5 missed calls from Mayor Miller. 2 text messages. "Sarah, where are you? Security says you were in the basement." "Sarah, call me immediately. We need to talk about the inventory." He knew she had been down there. He didn't know what she found. Not yet. But the clock was ticking. The suspicion had started. Sarah put the car in drive and pulled out onto the cracked highway, heading back toward the glow of Hollow Creek on the horizon. She wasn't returning as the town's darling historian. She was returning as a spy in enemy territory. The Jubilee was in 2 weeks. That gave her 14 days to digitize the evidence, plan the infiltration, and figure out how to hijack the biggest event in the state's history without getting arrested or worse. As the lights of the town grew brighter in her windshield, Sarah realized she wasn't afraid of the Colonel anymore. She looked at the dashboard clock. Midnight. The day of the Jubilee had technically begun the countdown. "Happy anniversary, Colonel," she whispered, her eyes cold and hard on the road. "Enjoy it while it lasts." The next 2 weeks in Hollow Creek were a blur of red, white, and blue vertigo, a fever dream of patriotism manufactured on a deadline. The town had transformed into a caricature of itself, a living theme park where the air smelled permanently of kettle corn, asphalt, and the distinct, metallic tang of pressurized anticipation. For Sarah, walking through the streets was like moving through a minefield disguised as a birthday party. Every banner waving in the summer breeze felt like a threat. Every poster of Colonel Blackwood's stern, heroic visage felt like an accusation. She continued to go to work, to wear her beige uniform, to clip the microphone to her belt, and to smile until her jaw ached. But beneath the surface, she was vibrating with the frequency of a spy deep in enemy territory. The paranoia was a physical weight. It sat on her chest when she woke up and followed her like a shadow as she navigated the crowded sidewalks. She stopped using her main email account. She bought a burner phone from a gas station 2 towns over. She parked her car in different spots, convinced that the black SUV she saw idling near the cultural center was watching her. It probably wasn't. It was likely just a vendor unloading supplies for the VIP tent. But the innocence of her world had been shattered in that basement, and now every coincidence looked like a conspiracy. Her apartment became the operations center for a war only she knew was happening. The dining table, usually reserved for unread mail and coffee mugs, was now a chaotic landscape of technology and history. She had bought a high-resolution portable scanner, and night after night, with the curtains drawn tight against the prying streetlights, she digitized Alara Vance's diary. It was a slow, painstaking process. She had to handle the crumbling pages with surgical care, flattening the spine gently to capture the fading ink without cracking the binding. Every page scan was a small act of rebellion. Page 42. The river is rising. Thomas says it is nature. I say it is the weeping of the land. Scan. Save. Encrypt. Page 88. Blackwood's men took the horses today. They said it was a requisition. They laughed when I asked for a receipt. Scan. Save. Encrypt. The digital file grew, a gigabyte of evidence that could topple the town's economy. But Sarah knew that raw data wasn't enough. People didn't read PDFs. They watched screens. If she wanted to break the spell, she had to interrupt the spectacle. She needed to hijack the narrative in real time, in front of the cameras, in front of the world. And for that, she needed access to the nervous system of the Jubilee, the audiovisual control tower. The problem was Sarah was a historian, not a hacker. She knew dates and lineages, not signal flows and encryption keys. She needed an ally, someone who spoke the language of cables and frequencies, someone who didn't buy the town's myth. She found him on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before the event. Leo pinned a coil of XLR cable to the stage, rigging with the aggression of a man who hated his job. He was the lead technician for soundcheck events, the external contractor hired to manage the massive main stage production. He was a man of about 30, with a scruffy beard, eyes that looked permanently exhausted, and a Metallica t-shirt that had seen better decades. Sarah had watched him from the edge of the square for 2 days. He didn't mingle with the town council members. He didn't smile at the tourists. When Mayor Miller came by to micromanage the speaker placement, Leo had rolled his eyes so hard Sarah thought they might detach. He was perfect. Sarah waited until the lunch break, when the stage crew dispersed to the food trucks. Leo stayed behind, sitting on the edge of the stage, smoking a cigarette and scrolling through his phone with a look of profound boredom. Sarah approached him, clutching 2 cold coffees she'd bought from the shop across the street. "You look like you'd rather be literally anywhere else," Sarah said, holding out one of the cups. Leo looked up, squinting against the sun. He eyed the coffee, then her badge. "You're the tour guide lady, the one who talks about the heroic spirit of the frontier or whatever." His voice was dry, scratching like sandpaper. "And you're the sound guy who keeps setting the subwoofers to rattle the windows of City Hall. I appreciate that, by the way." Leo snorted, a brief flash of amusement crossing his face. He took the coffee. "Accident. Purely accidental. What do you want?" "I can't get you backstage passes for the bluegrass band." "Don't ask." "I don't want passes," Sarah said, hopping up to sit on the stage next to him. She lowered her voice, though the nearest person was 50 feet away. "I want to know about the video wall, the big LED screen behind the statue." Leo took a sip of the coffee and grimaced. "What about it?" "It's a 4K modular display, bright enough to be seen from space. Cost the mayor a fortune." "How is it fed?" Sarah asked, trying to sound casual. "Like, is it just a laptop? A server?" Leo turned to look at her, his eyes narrowing. The boredom vanished, replaced by a technician's sharp skepticism. "Why? You planning to stream Netflix during the speech?" "Hypothetically," Sarah said, staring straight ahead at the statue of Blackwood. "If someone wanted to play a video file, a specific file, during the main event, How would they do it? Leo didn't answer immediately. He took a drag of his cigarette, exhaling a plume of blue smoke that drifted toward the bronze kernel. Hypothetically, he mimicked. The system is locked down. It runs through a master switcher in the control tent. The mayor's team has to approve every pixel that goes up there. We have a redundant backup system, firewalls, the works. It's tighter than a drum. But you have a key, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. I have the admin password to the media server, yeah. I'm the tech director. He turned fully toward her now. What are you up to, tour guide? You got a scandalous video of the mayor? Worse, Sarah said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the flash drive. The one containing the scans and the edited audio of Martha's testimony she had spent all night mixing. She held it in her palm. I have the truth. About this, she gestured to the square, the statue, the town. Everything I say on those tours? It's a lie. Blackwood didn't save the town. He slaughtered it. Leo stared at her. He looked at the flash drive, then back at her face. He was looking for the crazy. He was looking for the conspiracy nut gleam. But Sarah held his gaze, steady and cold. You're serious, he said. Dead serious. There's a woman, 92 years old, whose family was erased so we could sell tickets. I'm gonna put her on that screen, Leo, with or without you. But with you, I can do it without getting tackled by security in 10 seconds. Leo looked at the flash drive. He looked at the mayor's office across the square. He took another drag of his cigarette, then flicked the butt onto the pristine pavement of the plaza. I hate this town, Leo said quietly. My rent just went up 20% because of the tourism boom. My landlord says it's the Blackwood premium. He reached out and took the flash drive from her hand. It was a subtle movement, hidden from view by his body. If this bricks the system, I'm blaming a power surge. It won't brick the system, Sarah said, feeling a rush of adrenaline so potent it made her dizzy. It's just an MP4 file. Can you cue it? I can create a macro, Leo muttered, his mind already working through the interface. I'll set it as a technical standby override. If I hit the panic button on the console, it cuts the main feed and switches to emergency backup. I can swap the emergency graphic for your video. When? Sunday, noon, during the keynote speech. That's when the eyes will be on the screen. He slipped the drive into his pocket. Don't talk to me again until then. If they see us conspiring, they'll swap the crew. Thank you, Sarah breathed. Don't thank me yet. Leo stood up, brushing ash off his jeans. If this goes south, I don't know you. You're just a crazy lady who hacked the Wi-Fi. Sarah watched him walk away, disappearing into the labyrinth of flight cases and trusses. Step 1 was complete. The gun was loaded. Now she just had to wait to pull the trigger. But the waiting was the hardest part. The next 48 hours were a psychological endurance test. Mayor Miller was everywhere. He seemed to have cloned himself. He was shaking hands at the Rotary Club, inspecting the flower arrangements, yelling at the sanitation department. And every time Sarah crossed his path, the temperature seemed to drop. On Thursday afternoon, the summons came. Sarah, step into my office for a moment, would you? Miller called out as she walked past City Hall. He was standing on the steps, smiling, but his eyes were hard little marbles behind his spectacles. Sarah froze. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Stay calm. You are just the tour guide. You are excited about the party. Of course, Mr. Mayor, she said, forcing a bright smile. She followed him into the office. It was cool inside, the air conditioning humming. The room smelled of mahogany and expensive scotch. Miller walked behind his massive desk and sat down, gesturing for her to take the chair opposite him. He didn't speak for a long moment. He just shuffled some papers, rearranging a stack of permits. We missed you at the staff briefing this morning, Miller said, not looking up. I was finalizing the VIP gift bags, Sarah lied smoothly. The Historical Society wanted to add a pamphlet about the restoration. Ah, diligent as always. Miller finally looked up. He clasped his hands on the desk. You know, Sarah, we've been having some irregularities. With the inventory, Sarah's stomach dropped. Irregularities. The library renovation team, Miller said, watching her face closely. They reported a breach in the sub-basement containment wall. Someone moved some debris, and I recall asking you to go down there. I did, Sarah said, keeping her voice steady. Like you asked. It was a mess. Rat droppings, water damage. I didn't stay long. The smell was awful. And you didn't find anything? Just moldy tax records. Nothing display-worthy. Miller stared at her. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He was weighing her. He was looking for the twitch, the sweat, the blink. Sarah forced herself to be a statue. She channeled the colonel outside. Stoic, unreadable. That's a shame, Miller said finally, leaning back in his chair. I had hoped we might find a time capsule. Something to enhance the narrative. Maybe next centennial, Sarah said. Miller laughed, but there was no humor in it. Indeed, Sarah, loyalty is a rare currency these days. This town takes care of its own, but it has very little patience for disruption. We have senators coming this weekend, investors from Seattle. Nothing can go wrong. You understand? I understand perfectly, Mayor. It's going to be a flawless event. Good. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. Go check on the floral arrangements at the gazebo. I think they used the wrong shade of petunias. Sarah walked out of the office, her legs feeling like jelly. He knew, or he suspected enough to warn her. He was tightening the noose. She needed to move faster. That night, Sarah drove to Cedar Hollow for the second time. She didn't park in the lot. She parked down the road and walked through the woods, entering the nursing home through a side door she had propped open with a rock during her last visit. It was risky, but she couldn't risk being seen on the visitor log again. Martha was awake, waiting for her. The old woman looked different. There was a vitality in her frailty, a spark in the cloudy eyes. She was dressed in her best Sunday clothes, a floral dress that hung loosely on her frame, and a cardigan. Is it time? Martha asked. Not yet. Sunday, Sarah whispered, setting up her portable audio recorder on the bedside table. But we need to record the rest. We need the details, the names, everything your mother told you. For 2 hours, the room was filled with the ghosts of 1875. Martha spoke clearly, her voice gaining strength as she recounted the oral history of the massacre. She listed the names of the families. The Vances, the Millers, no relation to the mayor, the O'Connells. She described the sound of the horses, the smell of the burning church, the specific words Blackwood had screamed as he kicked down the door of the meeting hall. Sarah wept as she listened, monitoring the audio levels. It was a horror story, but it was also a love story, a love for a home that was stolen. And the locket? Sarah asked at the end. Tell them about the locket. The gold was soft, Martha said into the microphone. My grandmother bit it to make sure. It was the heart of the mountain. And he took the heart, but he couldn't take the memory. When the recording was done, Sarah packed up her gear. She held Martha's hand. I'm going to come for you on Sunday morning. I'll bring a car. We're going to sit in the front row. I'll be ready, Martha said. I've been ready for 90 years. Friday and Saturday passed in a blur of final preparations. The town swelled with people. Tour buses clogged the main artery. The hotels were booked to capacity. The noise was constant. Sound checks, brass bands practicing, the roar of generators. Sarah moved through it all like a ghost, performing her duties, checking the flowers, guiding the VIPs, all while the flash drive burned a hole in her pocket. She exchanged no words with Leo, only a single, imperceptible nod across the crowded square during the Saturday night fireworks rehearsal. Then Sunday morning broke. The day of the Jubilee dawned with a sky of aggressive, perfect blue. Not a cloud in sight. It was as if the universe was conspiring to make the deception look as beautiful as possible. Sarah woke up at 5 a.m. She didn't eat. She dressed in her official uniform, the crisp beige blazer, the navy scarf, the name tag. She looked in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the Sarah Jenkins who taught kids about pioneer butter churning. This was an insurgent. She drove to Cedar Hollow to pick up Martha. The plan was simple. Get Martha into the car, drive to the staff entrance using her all-access pass, and wheelchair her into the VIP section right before the speeches started. Leo would trigger the video, the truth would play, and then Sarah would wheel Martha onto the stage to confront the mayor live on camera. But when she arrived at Shady Pines, the driveway was blocked. 2 police cruisers sat sideways across the entrance, lights flashing. An ambulance was parked near the front doors. Sarah's heart stopped. She slammed the car into park and ran toward the officers. "What's happening? What's going on?" "Back up, ma'am," a deputy said, holding up a hand. "Medical emergency. No visitors." "I'm not a visitor. I'm family," Sarah screamed, the lie coming easily now. "Martha Little, room 304. Is she okay?" The deputy checked a clipboard. He frowned. "Little?" "Yeah. Early morning transport. She had a respiratory episode. They took her to County General about 20 minutes ago." Respiratory episode? Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Martha had been fine. She had been stronger than ever. "She's old, ma'am. These things happen." Sarah stared at the flashing lights. Was it a coincidence? Or had Miller found out? Had he checked the visitor logs, seen her name, and made a call? Respiratory episode was a convenient excuse to isolate a witness. Is she alive?" "She was stable when they left," the deputy said, softening slightly. "Look, you can go to the hospital, but you can't go in there." Sarah stumbled back to her car. The hospital was 40 minutes in the opposite direction. If she went there, she would miss the keynote speech. She would miss the window. Leo was waiting for the signal. The video was cued. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She had lost her witness. She had lost the emotional anchor of her plan. Without Martha, it was just a video. It was just a digital accusation against a flesh-and-blood hero. But she still had the diary. She still had the locket in her pocket. And she had Leo. "I can't save you today, Martha," Sarah whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "But I can save your name." She spun the car around, tires screeching on the asphalt, and gunned the engine toward Hollow Creek. She drove like a madwoman, ignoring speed limits, her mind racing. She would have to be the voice. She would have to stand on that stage alone. She arrived at the town perimeter at 10:30 a.m. The traffic was gridlocked. She flashed her staff pass at the checkpoints, weaving through the maze of barricades until she reached the rear staff lot behind City Hall. She ran toward the square. The crowd was immense. Thousands of people packed shoulder to shoulder, a sea of hats and flags. The energy was electric, a low roar of excitement. On the main stage, a bluegrass band was finishing their set. The massive LED screen behind them displayed a looping animation of the American flag waving in slow motion. Sarah pushed her way through the throng, heading for the audiovisual tent that rose like a fortress on the risers in the middle of the square. She needed to get to Leo. She needed to tell him the plan had changed, that Martha wasn't coming, that Sarah would take the mic herself. She reached the perimeter of the tech compound. Usually, a simple laminated pass was enough to get in. But today, standing in front of the gate, were 2 men. They weren't local police. They weren't the usual event security in yellow windbreakers. They were wearing tactical black gear, sunglasses, and earpieces. They looked like military contractors. "Staff access," Sarah said, holding up her badge, breathless. "I need to speak to the technical director. Urgent update for the run of show." The guard on the left didn't even look at the badge. He stared straight ahead. "Access denied." "Excuse me? I'm the head of historical services. I work for the mayor. I have an all-access pass. Security protocols have been updated as of 0800 hours. The guard droned. "Threat level elevated. No unauthorized personnel in the control booth. Direct orders from the mayor's office." Sarah felt the ground sway beneath her. Threat level elevated. Miller knew. He definitely knew. He had locked down the nerve center. "I have to get in there," Sarah said, her voice rising in panic. "The mayor needs me to." The guard stepped forward, blocking her path with a chest like a slab of granite. "Ma'am, step back, or you will be removed from the venue." She looked past him, through the mesh of the tent window. She could see Leo inside, hunched over the mixing console. He was wearing his headset, looking stressed. He glanced up, saw her arguing with the guards, and his face went pale. He gave a tiny, imperceptible shake of his head. "I can't help you." He was locked in. She was locked out. The music on stage died down. A hush fell over the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen." The announcer's voice boomed through the massive line array speakers, rattling Sarah's chest. "Please welcome the man who made this all possible, Mayor Jeremiah Miller." The crowd erupted in cheers. Miller walked onto the stage, waving, looking every inch the benevolent leader. He adjusted the microphone, beaming at the sea of voters. Sarah stood paralyzed near the tech tent. She was 20 feet from the controls, but she might as well have been on the moon. She had the evidence. She had the truth, but she had no way to amplify it. The massive screen behind Miller flickered, showing a live close-up of his smiling face. 150 years ago, Miller began, his voice smooth as silk. A hero stood on this very ground. Sarah looked around wildly. She needed a way in. She needed a miracle. Her hand brushed the locket in her pocket. The sharp edge of the raw gold dug into her finger. The gold was soft. "My grandmother bid it." Sarah looked at the main stage. It was flanked by 2 smaller towers for lighting rigs. She looked at the cables snake-and-G along the ground, thick rubber pythons carrying the power and data. They ran from the tech tent under a heavy rubber ramp and up to the stage. She couldn't get to the control booth, but the signal had to travel to the screen. She looked at the connection point at the base of the stage, where the main data line plugged into the processor for the LED wall. It was guarded by a single local cop, looking bored and overheated. Sarah took a deep breath. She didn't have a plan anymore. She had an impulse. She tightened the strap of her bag, lowered her head, and started to move through the crowd, not away from the stage, but directly toward the base of the lie itself. The heat rising off the asphalt of Founders Square was a physical force, a shimmering wall of distortion that turned the thousands of waving flags into a nauseating, undulating sea of red, white, and blue. Sarah Jenkins stood at the edge of the crowd, the bass from the massive speaker arrays thumping against her sternum like a second, erratic heartbeat. On the stage, 50 feet above her, Mayor Jeremiah Miller was a tiny figure in a pristine charcoal suit. His voice amplified to the decibel level of a deity. "We look to the past not to dwell in it," Miller bellowed, his voice smooth, practiced, and dripping with the false sincerity of a career politician, "but to find the strength for our future." Colonel Blackwood didn't ask for a fight. He didn't ask for war. But when the safety of this valley was threatened, he answered the call. A cheer went up from the crowd, a roar that sounded to Sarah less like celebration and more like the baying of a mob. She gripped the strap of her canvas bag so tight her fingers went numb. The locket in her pocket felt heavy, hot against her hip, as if the gold itself was radioactive with the truth it held. She was cut off. The control tent was a fortress. Martha was gone, silenced in a hospital bed miles away. Leo was trapped behind glass, watching her with helpless eyes. The plan, the clean, elegant, technological injection of truth, was dead. Sarah looked at the stage again. It was a monolith of scaffolding and black bunting. To the left, a ramp led up from the ground level, guarded by a single police officer, Officer Higgins, a man she had known since high school. He looked bored, sweating in his uniform, tapping his foot to the rhythm of his own impatience. This was it. There was no clever hack. There was no backdoor. There was only the stage, the microphone, and the sheer, reckless audacity of desperation. Sarah took a breath. The air tasted of ozone and cheap cologne. She didn't think. She just moved. She let the panic that had been clawing at her throat transform into a mask of professional urgency. She smoothed her beige blazer, adjusted her lanyard, and marched toward the ramp with the stride of a woman who had a job to do. "Higgins!" she barked, pitching her voice over the roar of the applause. Officer Higgins jumped, his hand instinctively drifting to his belt before he recognized her. "Sarah? Jesus, don't sneak up on me. What are you doing? I thought you were with the VIPs." "Audio issue," Sarah lied, breathless, pointing frantically at her earpiece which wasn't even turned on. "The mayor's lapel mic is cutting out on the broadcast feed. Leo can't fix it from the booth, the receiver is on the stage deck. I have to swap the battery pack during the next applause break or we lose the national feed." Higgins hesitated, glancing up at the mayor, whose voice was currently booming clearly through the PA. "Sounds fine to me." "It sounds fine here," Sarah snapped, channeling every ounce of her authority as the town historian. "But the stream is garbled. Do you want to be the one to explain to the mayor why he sounded like a robot on CNN?" "Move, Higgins." The combination of technical jargon and the threat of the mayor's wrath did the trick. Higgins stepped aside, lifting the yellow caution tape. All right, make it quick. Don't trip on the cables." "Thanks," Sarah breathed, ducking under the tape. She hit the ramp running. The incline was steep, the rubber matting slick under her boots. With every step, the crowd noise shifted, changing from a wall of sound into a distinct, roaring ocean below her. She was ascending the mountain. She was climbing onto the altar. As she reached the wings of the stage, the blinding glare of the theatrical lights hit her. It was a white-hot wash that erased the world beyond the platform. She was hidden in the shadows of the side curtain, breathing hard, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Mayor Miller was 20 feet away, standing at the lucid podium. He was in his element, bathed in the spotlight, gesturing expansively toward the statue behind him. "He stood alone," Miller shouted, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "He stood alone against the darkness so that we could live in the light." Sarah saw the stage manager, a woman with a headset and a clipboard, looking the other way, focused on cueing the confetti cannons. The path to the podium was clear. It was madness. It was suicide. It was the only way. Sarah didn't walk. She didn't run. She strode out of the shadows and into the light. The reaction was a slow ripple. First, the people in the front rows pointed. Then the murmur spread. The stage manager turned, her eyes widening in horror, silently mouthing "Get off" into her headset. Mayor Miller, lost in his rhetoric, didn't see her until she was 5 feet away. He turned to gesture to the historians of our town, expecting a nod from the empty wing, and instead found Sarah Jenkins standing there, her hair wind-blown, her eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. He froze. The microphone picked up his sudden intake of breath, a sharp hiss that echoed through the square. "Sarah?" he whispered, confused, forgetting to cover the mic. "What the hell are you?" Sarah didn't stop. She stepped up to the podium, invading his space, entering the sacred circle of the spotlight. The heat of the lights was intense, burning her skin. She could smell the mayor, expensive soap, mint, and fear. "It's a lie," Sarah said. She didn't shout it. She said it into the silence of the microphone's proximity effect, and her voice, trembling but clear, boomed out over the town of Hollow Creek. "It's a lie." The crowd fell silent. It was a sudden, vacuum-sealed silence, the kind that happens before a car crash. Thousands of people stared up, confusion rippling across their faces. Miller's face went from confusion to a mask of fury in a nanosecond. He reached for the microphone, his hand clamping over hers. "Technical difficulties," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Security, get her off. She's unwell." "I am not unwell," Sarah screamed, fighting him for the mic stand. She was smaller than him, but she was fueled by adrenaline and the rage of 100 years. She shoved her shoulder into his chest, knocking him back a step. "I am the only one here who is awake." Security guards were sprinting from the wings now, their heavy boots thudding on the wooden deck. Sarah had seconds, maybe 3, maybe 4. She didn't try to explain. She didn't try to read the diary. There was no time for words. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the locket. She grabbed the gooseneck of the microphone and bent it down, forcing Miller back, and thrust the gold nugget directly into the lens of the teleprompter camera, the camera that was feeding the massive LED wall behind them. "Look at it!" she shrieked, her voice tearing at her throat. "Look at the gold!" On the gigantic screen, the image of the mayor's face was replaced by a shaky, extreme close-up of the locket. The raw, unrefined gold caught the stage lights, glittering with a primal, jagged beauty. The inscription, scratched into the soft metal, was visible, magnified to the size of a billboard. T&E Vance. Sarah yelled, pointing at the screen. "He didn't save them. He killed them. They were here first." Miller lunged at her. He grabbed her arm, his fingernails digging into her skin. "Cut the feed." He screamed toward the tech tent. "Cut the goddamn feed." Two security guards slammed into Sarah from behind. The impact knocked the wind out of her. She hit the floor hard, the microphone stand crashing down with her, creating a deafening feedback squeal that made the entire crowd cover their ears. Sarah was pinned. A knee was pressed into her back. Her face was smashed against the rough wood of the stage. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't speak. But she had done it. She had created the chaos. In the audiovisual tent, Leo sat frozen at the console. The two mercenaries guarding the door had turned, distracted by the spectacle on stage, their hands on their radios, shouting for backup. Target secured. One of them yelled, "Cut the main video. Go to black." Leo looked at the screen. He saw Sarah being crushed under the weight of the guards. He saw the mayor standing over her, adjusting his tie, looking like a man trying to put a lid on a volcano. He looked at the panic button on his stream deck, the macro he had programmed, the one that would switch the input to the file on the flash drive. "Cut it!" The mercenary yelled at him, turning around and reaching for the power cable. Leo didn't hesitate. He didn't think about his rent. He didn't think about the lawsuit. He thought about Sarah's eyes when she handed him the coffee. "Oops," Leo whispered. He slammed his fist onto the macro button. And then he ducked. On stage, the feedback squeal cut out abruptly. The image of the locket vanished from the giant screen. For a second, the screen went black. The crowd murmured, sensing the show was over, sensing that order was being restored. Mayor Miller, breathing heavily, stepped back to the podium, straightening his jacket. "Ladies and gentlemen," he panted, forcing a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. "I apologize. A tragic mental breakdown. We will get her the help she..." Crack. The sound of a gunshot tore through the speakers. Not a real gunshot, but a recorded one. Crisp, loud, terrifying. The crowd ducked. Miller flinched. On the massive screen, the blackness dissolved. It wasn't a graphic. It wasn't a slide. It was a video of an old woman, sitting in a wheelchair, her face illuminated by the soft light of a nursing home window. Martha Little's face was 40 feet high. "My name is Martha Stone," the voice rasped, filling the square, louder than the mayor, louder than the lies. "And I am the last ghost of Hollow Creek." The security guard on top of Sarah froze. He stopped pulling her arms. He looked up. Mayor Miller turned slowly, dread icing his veins. He looked at the screen. "My grandmother was Alara Vance," Martha's voice continued, accompanied by a slow pan over the scanned pages of the red diary. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. "On Christmas Eve, 1875, Colonel Jameson Blackwood burned our church. He shot my father in the back while he was praying." The square was silent. 5,000 people stood like statues. No one breathed. The only sound was the voice of the witness. "He didn't save us," Martha said, her eyes staring out from the screen, piercing the soul of every person in the crowd. "He stole the ground you are standing on, and he paid for this town with our blood. Turn it off." Miller screamed, his voice shrill and hysterical. He ran toward the side of the stage, waving his arms at the tech tent. "Turn it off. It's fake. It's AI. Turn it off." But the video kept playing. It showed the tax records. It showed the death certificates. It showed the timeline that didn't add up. Sarah, still pinned on the floor, managed to turn her head. She saw the crowd. They weren't looking at the mayor anymore. They were looking at the statue, the bronze hero, and for the first time they really saw it. They saw the rifle not as a tool of defense, but as a weapon of murder. They saw the outstretched hand not as a gesture of salvation, but of theft. The video ended with a simple image: the locket. The same locket Sarah had shoved into the camera moments ago. "The truth is the only gold that matters," Martha's voice whispered. The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It lasted for 10 seconds, then 20. Miller stood at the podium, alone. He looked small. He looked old. He opened his mouth to speak, to spin, to weave the web again. "Citizens," he croaked. "Liar." The shout came from the middle of the crowd. It was a man's voice, deep, angry. "Murderer!" Another voice cried out from the left. "Take down the statue!" A woman screamed. The dam broke. The applause that Miller had cultivated for years turned into a tidal wave of fury. The illusion had shattered, and the jagged pieces were cutting deep. People began to push forward, not to cheer but to demand. The security guard finally let go of Sarah. He stood up, looking at the crowd, then at the mayor, and then backed away. He didn't want to be on the wrong side of history. Sarah pushed herself up. Her ribs ached. Her lip was bleeding. She dusted off her blazer. She walked over to the edge of the stage and sat down, her legs dangling over the edge. She watched the chaos unfold. She watched the mayor retreat as trash began to rain down on the stage. Popcorn buckets, soda cups, flags. She looked toward the tech tent. She couldn't see Leo, but she saw the two mercenaries dragging someone out the back. She hoped he was okay. She hoped he knew he was a hero. The police were moving in now, forming a protective ring around the mayor, but not to honor him, to extract him. The jubilee was over. The riot was beginning. Sarah reached into her pocket and touched the locket. It was still there, warm, real. "We did it, Martha," she whispered into the noise. "We brought the church down." A shadow fell over her. She looked up. It was Officer Higgins. He wasn't reaching for his handcuffs. He was looking at the statue, then at her. He looked sick. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the chanting of the crowd. "Sarah, is it true?" Sarah looked him in the eye. She wiped the blood from her lip. "Read the book, Higgins," she said softly. "It's all in the book." She held out her hands, wrists together, waiting for the cuffs. She knew they were coming. She knew she would be arrested for incitement, for trespassing, for assault. She didn't care. The statue loomed behind her, but it felt smaller now. It was just metal, and metal could be melted down. The holding cell in the county jail was cold, smelling of ammonia and despair. But to Sarah, it felt like a sanctuary. The noise of the crowd was gone, replaced by the rhythmic buzzing of a fluorescent light. She had been processed, fingerprinted, and locked up for 6 hours. The charges listed on her sheet were a laundry list of civil disobedience: disorderly conduct, trespassing, incitement to riot, assault. She sat on the metal cot, staring at the blank concrete wall. Her adrenaline had crashed hours ago, leaving her shaking and exhausted. Her blazer was torn at the shoulder, and a purple bruise was blooming on her cheekbone where she had hit the stage deck. She wondered about Leo. Was he in the cell next door? Had he been fired? Or worse, she wondered about Martha. Was she still in the hospital? Did she know her face had just been seen by the entire nation? The heavy steel door at the end of the corridor clanked open. Footsteps echoed on the concrete. Not the heavy thud of a guard's boot, but the sharp, confident click of dressed shoes. Sarah didn't look up until the footsteps stopped in front of her cell. "You made quite a mess, Miss Jenkins." Sarah looked up. Standing on the other side of the bars was a woman she didn't recognize. She was tall, wearing a sharp navy suit that cost more than Sarah's car. She carried a sleek leather briefcase and projected an aura of shark-like competence. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice raspy. "Are you my public defender?" The woman smiled, a tight, professional expression that didn't reach her eyes. Hardly. Public defenders are for people who lose. My name is Elena Rostova. I represent the ACLU. And I also have a message from the New York Times. Sarah sat up straighter. The Times? Your little stunt went viral, Sarah? Elena said. Unlocking her briefcase and pulling out a tablet, she held it up to the bars. Sarah looked at the screen. It was a Twitter feed. The top trending hashtag was #HollowCreekTruth. There were millions of posts, clips of her storming the stage, clips of Martha's testimony, side-by-side comparisons of the diary pages and the town's official history plaques. The video Leo played wasn't just on the screens in the square, Elena explained. He live-streamed it to a Twitch channel he set up. 3 million people watched the mayor try to tackle you. Sarah stared at the numbers. It was too big to comprehend. Is Miller? Miller is currently holding a press conference trying to claim he was unaware of the historical discrepancies, Elena said with a dry chuckle. But nobody is buying it. The governor has already announced an independent inquiry into the land deeds. And the Blackwood Mining Consortium? Their stock dropped 12% in 4 hours. What about Martha? Sarah asked. Is she okay? Elena's expression softened slightly. She's stable. She's at County General. And she has a security detail now, private security, paid for by a GoFundMe that raised $50,000 in the last hour. She's safe, Sarah. You kept your promise. Sarah let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 2 weeks. She leaned her head back against the cold wall and closed her eyes. So what happens now? Sarah asked. Do I go to prison? For telling the truth? Elena raised an eyebrow. I don't think so. The charges are flimsy. The assault charge won't stick. Miller grabbed you first. Trespassing is debatable since you were an employee with a badge. And incitement? Well, that's just free speech. Elena tapped the tablet. But you won't be going back to work as a tour guide. The town council fired you via email 20 minutes ago. Good, Sarah said. I quit anyway. I have bail money posted, Elena said. You can walk out of here right now. But I have to warn you, there's a circus outside.
Reporters, angui locals, suportiva locals.
There's a war zone out there. Sarah stood up. Her legs were stiff, but she felt a strange, new strength in her bones. She walked to the bars. I'm ready, Sarah said. Elena signaled the guard. The lock buzzed, and the door slid open. As they walked through the precinct, Sarah saw the TV screens in the lobby. Every channel was covering Hollow Creek. They were interviewing historians, legal experts, and descendants of other displaced tribes. She had lit a match, and the fire was spreading far beyond the borders of Oregon. They stepped out the front doors of the station. The flash of cameras was blinding. A roar of voices hit them. Questions, shouts of support, insults. Sarah, did you know about the massacre? Sarah, are you a traitor to this town? Ms. Jenkins, look here. Sarah shielded her eyes. She looked for her car, but instead, she saw a familiar figure standing near the barricade. It was Leo. He was wearing sunglasses and a hoodie, leaning against a railing, looking unbothered. He gave her a small salute and tapped his phone. Message sent. And behind him, further back in the crowd, Sarah saw something that made her stop. A group of people were standing silently, holding signs. They weren't reporters. They weren't angry tourists. They looked like locals, shop owners, teachers, mechanics. One sign read, "We want to know." Another read, "Justice for Alara." Sarah realized then that she hadn't destroyed the town. She had broken it, yes. But bones have to be broken to be reset correctly. She didn't speak to the reporters. She got into Elena's car, and they drove away, leaving the chaos behind. Where do you want to go? Elena asked. Home? No, Sarah said, looking out the window at the passing trees. Take me to the hospital. I have a friend waiting for me. The silence in the car as Elena drove toward County General Hospital was not empty. It was heavy, packed with the vibrating aftershocks of a world that had just cracked open. Sarah watched the landscape blur past the window. The pine trees, the strip malls, the billboards advertising the historic charm of Hollow Creek, and felt a strange detachment. It was as if she were watching a movie of her own life. Her hands, resting in her lap, were stained with the dust of the stage and the grease of the microphone stand. Her shoulder throbbed where the security guard's knee had driven her into the deck. But beneath the physical pain, there was a vast, terrifying lightness. The secret she had carried, the stone in her chest, was gone. It was out there now, floating in the digital ether, playing on millions of screens, undeniable and irrevocable. When they arrived at the hospital, the sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. It was a stark contrast to the perfect, manufactured blue of the morning. Elena flashed her legal credentials at the nurse's station, cutting through the red tape with the efficiency of a scalpel. They were led to a private room on the 4th floor, guarded by a burly man in a suit who nodded at Elena and stepped aside. Sarah pushed the door open. The room was dim, lit only by the glowing monitor of a television mounted on the wall. Martha was sitting up in bed, looking small against the mountain of pillows. Her silver hair was brushed, and her eyes were fixed on the screen. On the news, a looped clip of the riot in Founders Square was playing. It showed the moment Sarah had shoved the locket into the camera, the gold flashing like a beacon. Then it cut to an aerial shot of the square, showing the debris, the police lines, and the statue of Colonel Blackwood standing isolated in a circle of trash. "Turn it up," Martha said, her voice raspy but steady. She didn't look at Sarah. She was watching the statue. Sarah walked over and picked up the remote, increasing the volume slightly. The news anchor was speaking in a grave tone. "Governor Hayes has declared a state of emergency in Hollow Creek, pending a federal investigation into the land deeds dating back to 1875. Meanwhile, the Blackwood Mining Consortium has issued a statement suspending all operations." Martha let out a long, slow breath. She turned her head, and her milky eyes found Sarah. For the first time since they met, the hardness was gone from her face. The centuries of generational anger, the bitterness that had etched lines into her skin, seemed to have evaporated. She looked tired. She looked ancient, but she looked free. "They saw it," Martha whispered. "They all saw it." "They did," Sarah said, pulling a chair close to the bed. She took Martha's hand. It felt fragile, like dry parchment, but the grip was warm. "We didn't just tell them, Martha. We showed them. The whole world knows his name now, and they know Alara's." Martha looked back at the screen where a photo of the diary page, the one listing the names of the dead, was being displayed. "I thought I would die with that story in my throat," she said softly. "My mother used to say that the truth is a seed. If you bury it, it doesn't die. It grows roots. It breaks the foundation." She squeezed Sarah's hand. "You broke the house, Sarah. I broke the town," Sarah admitted, a wave of guilt washing over her. "People are going to lose their jobs. The shops, the hotels. They were building castles on a graveyard." Martha cut in sharply. "It was never their town to begin with. You didn't break it, girl. You exorcised it." Sarah rested her forehead against their joined hands. The adrenaline was finally fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. She closed her eyes and listened to the hum of the hospital machines, the distant siren of an ambulance, and the steady breathing of the woman who had started it all. For the first time in weeks, the ghost of Hollow Creek wasn't haunting her. It was sitting right there, holding her hand, and it wasn't scary at all. It was just family. 3 months later, the crane arrived on a Tuesday morning in November. It was a gray, blustery day, the kind where the wind whipped the dead leaves into spirals on the pavement. The sky was the color of slate, matching the mood of the small crowd that had gathered at the edge of the police barricades in Founders Square. Sarah stood near the back, her collar turned up against the chill. She wasn't wearing her beige tour guide uniform anymore. She was wearing jeans and a thick wool coat, blending in with the locals. The town had changed. The festive bunting was gone, stripped away the day after the Jubilee. The Blackwood Burger sign had been painted over in white. The gift shop windows, once filled with plush dolls of the Colonel and gold foil chocolates, were now displaying local art and books, history books, real ones. The streets were quieter. The tour buses had stopped coming in droves. Several businesses on Main Street had "for lease" signs in the windows, casualties of the sudden economic collapse. But there were other changes, too. The air felt different. It was cleaner. The frantic, desperate energy of the tourism boom was gone, replaced by a somber, grounded reality. The people walking the streets didn't look like actors on a set anymore. They looked like neighbors navigating a difficult winter. The crane operator gave a signal. The heavy chains clanked as they tightened around the bronze torso of Colonel Jameson Blackwood. The metal groaned, a screeching sound that echoed off the brick buildings. "Easy," a foreman shouted. "Lift it straight." Slowly, agonizingly, the statue began to rise. The feet of the colonel, which had stood planted on that pedestal for 100 years, separated from the stone. A cloud of dust and rust puffed out from the gap. Sarah watched as the hero of Hollow Creek hovered in the air. Suspended by chains, he didn't look majestic. He looked like what he was, a hollow shell. He swung slightly in the wind, his rifle pointing impotently at the gray sky, his face staring blankly at the tops of the trees. "Good riddance," a voice muttered beside her. Sarah turned. It was Mr. Henderson, the owner of the hardware store. He was an old man, a fourth-generation resident who had, months ago, refused to let Sarah hang a flyer for her independent research. "I didn't think you'd be here, Mr. Henderson," Sarah said quietly. The old man spat on the ground. He watched the statue being lowered onto a flatbed truck. "My great-grandfather worked in those mines," he said, his voice gruff. "Worked himself to death for scrip vouchers while Blackwood built his mansion. We always knew he was a bastard. We just didn't know he was a murderer." He looked at Sarah, his eyes hard but not unkind. "You cost this town a lot of money, Jenkins." "I know," Sarah said. She didn't apologize. She had learned that apologies were for mistakes, not for corrections. "But," Henderson sighed, shoving his hands into his pockets, "at least I don't have to look at that son of a bitch every time I cross the street to buy milk. My wife, she says the town feels lighter. Maybe she's right." He nodded at her, a curt, singular gesture of acknowledgement, and walked away. Sarah watched the truck secure the statue. It was being taken to a warehouse in the state capital, to be held as evidence in the ongoing investigation before eventually being melted down or placed in a museum of historical atrocities, depending on how the court cases went. Mayor Miller had resigned in disgrace 2 weeks after the Jubilee. He was currently facing charges of fraud and embezzlement. The town council had been dissolved and replaced by an interim committee. It was a mess, but it was an honest mess. "Hey," Sarah turned to see Leo walking toward her. He looked better than he had in the holding cell. He was wearing a jacket with the logo of a new company, Veritas Media. "Hey yourself," Sarah smiled. "Did you get the shot?" "Got it." Leo patted the camera bag slung over his shoulder. "The final descent of the Mad Colonel. It'll be the closing shot of the documentary." Leo had been fired by Soundcheck Events immediately after the Jubilee, but he hadn't stayed unemployed for long. The documentary crew from Netflix that had descended on the town hired him as their lead local producer. He and Sarah had spent the last 2 months interviewing families, digging through archives, and piecing together the full, unredacted history of the valley. "How's the new tour going?" Leo asked, nodding toward the group of people gathering near the gazebo. "Different," Sarah said. She wasn't a guide anymore. She was an educator. She had started a small, independent walking tour called The Hidden History of Hollow Creek. It didn't attract the families looking for cowboys and ice cream. It attracted university students, historians, and people who wanted to understand the complexity of the American West. The groups were smaller, quieter, and more respectful. "I have a group of 20 from the University of Oregon today." Sarah checked her watch. "They want to see the mine entrance." "Show them the ledger," Leo said. "That always gets them." "I will." "You okay?" Leo asked, searching her face. "You look a little
sad."
Sarah looked at the empty pedestal. It looked like a scar on the square, jagged and raw. But scars were signs of healing. "I'm not sad," Sarah said. "I'm just ready for the next part." "Give him hell, Sarah?" Leo grinned, squeezing her shoulder before heading off to film the truck departing. Sarah walked over to her group. They were waiting patiently, holding notebooks and rain jackets. "Welcome to Hollow Creek," Sarah began, her voice clear and unforced, no longer needing the microphone to amplify the truth. "The story I'm about to tell you isn't a fairy tale. There are no heroes on white horses. But it is a story about survival. And it begins with a woman named Elara. The memorial. The ceremony was held at sunset on the winter solstice. It was fitting, Sarah thought. The longest night of the year, followed by the return of the light. The site chosen for the memorial wasn't in the town square. That place was too loud, too tainted by commerce. The memorial was built on the outskirts of town, in the meadow where the original settlement church had stood before Blackwood burned it down. For decades, it had been an overgrown lot behind the gas station. Now it had been cleared. There were no statues here, no bronze men with guns. Instead, there was a circle of stones. Large, rough-hewn river rocks, pulled from the creek itself. They were arranged in a low wall, enclosing a garden of native wildflowers, dormant now in the winter, but ready to bloom in spring. In the center of the circle stood a simple monolith of black granite, polished to a mirror shine. Etched into the stone were 42 names. Sarah stood at the entrance of the garden, pushing the wheelchair. Martha was bundled in a heavy quilt, a wool hat pulled low over her ears. She was frilier now. The excitement of the last few months had taken a toll on her physical reserves, but her mind remained sharp as a tack. "Stop here," Martha said. Sarah locked the wheels. They were facing the stone. The setting sun caught the polished granite, making the names glow. Thomas Vance, Elara Vance, Samuel O'Connell, Mary O'Connell. A crowd had gathered, but it was nothing like the Jubilee. There were no cameras, no reporters, just the people who mattered, the descendants of the survivors who had driven in from all over the state, the locals who wanted to pay respects. Officer Higgins was there, standing in the back, hat in hand. Even the young receptionist from Shady Pines had come. A silence fell over the meadow. It wasn't the silence of shock or the silence of fear. It was the silence of a held breath finally being released. Sarah walked to the center of the circle. She didn't have a speech prepared. She didn't need one. "For 150 years, Sarah said, her voice carrying in the crisp air. These names were whispers. They were secrets kept in the dark to protect a lie. Today we bring them back into the light. We cannot undo what was done to them. We cannot give them back the lives that were stolen. But we can give them back their dignity. We can give them back their home." She stepped aside. One by one, the descendants came forward. They carried candles. They placed them at the base of the stone, illuminating the names of their ancestors. Martha gestured for Sarah. "Help me up." "Martha, you don't have to." "Help me up," she commanded, her voice fierce. Sarah hurried over and supported Martha's weight as the old woman struggled to her feet. Leaning heavily on Sarah, Martha walked, shuffling, painful steps, toward the black stone. She reached out a trembling hand and touched the name Elara Vance. "Mama told me," Martha whispered, tears streaming down her face, "that you liked the smell of sage after the rain. She told me you sang when you cooked. She told me you were brave." She leaned her forehead against the cold stone.
"I'm tired," Grandma Martha wept softly.
"I'm so tired of being angry. Can I put it down now?" Sarah felt a lump in her throat so large she could barely breathe. She placed a hand on Martha's back. "Yes," she whispered. "Put it down. It's over." Martha reached into her pocket. She pulled out the tin box. She opened it and took out the locket, the raw, golden heart of the story. "It belongs to the earth," Martha said. There was a small depression in the ground at the base of the monolith, specifically designed for this. Martha knelt, with Sarah's help, and placed the gold nugget into the soil. She covered it with a handful of dirt. "Rest now," Martha said. As they stood there, the sun finally dipped below the horizon. The candlelight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows against the stones. But these weren't the scary shadows of the past. They were warm. They were alive. Sarah looked up at the sky. The first stars were appearing. She thought about the diary, now safely preserved in the State Museum. She thought about the lie that had defined her life for so long, and how heavy it had been without her even realizing it. She looked at the town in the distance. The lights were coming on in the houses. It looked smaller, humbler, but also realer. It was a flawed place, full of people who had made mistakes, who had looked away when they should have looked closer. But they were trying. They were beginning the long, hard work of remembering. Sarah helped Martha back into the wheelchair. The old woman looked exhausted, her eyes drooping, but there was a peaceful smile on her lips. "Did we do good, Sarah?" Martha asked as Sarah tucked the quilt around her. "We did good," Sarah said. "What will you do now?" Martha asked. "Now that the ghosts are gone?" Sarah looked at the empty path ahead, leading back to the road. For the first time in her life, she didn't have a script. She didn't have a route planned out. "I don't know," Sarah smiled, and it was the most genuine smile she had worn in years. "I think I'll just see what happens next. I think I'll live in the present for a while." She began to push the wheelchair along the gravel path, the gravel crunching rhythmically under her boots. Behind them, the circle of candles burned bright against the gathering night, a vigil that no longer needed a guard, a truth that no longer needed a lock. The history of Hollow Creek was no longer written in stone or bronze. It was written in the quiet, resilient beating of the hearts that remained. And as they moved out of the garden and onto the road home, Sarah Jenkins didn't look back. She didn't need to. The past was finally behind her.